Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. The following episode is a collection of interviews that I did on the Bigfoot Society TikTok account. These are individuals that were unable to be vetted due to the nature of the interview situation. It is literally people coming into my live and requesting to come up on stage. That being said, we are starting out with an individual that has been having Bigfoot activity after the Hurricane Helene hit in North Carolina and East Tennessee. I believe the focus does still need to be on helping out people in this area for as long as it needs to be done. In fact, I'll have a link in the show notes. The Confessionals podcast has put a link on how individuals can donate to help out that area that has been affected. However, there are stories that will need to be shared. People will start to come forward, and this is a platform that will share those stories. The focus does need to be on helping the individuals that were affected, but we will start to share stories and accounts. And again, the link will be in the show notes for how to help those that have been affected by the hurricane.
Hello.
Hey, Nanda, this is Jeremiah. Thanks for coming up. Feel free to share what's been going on down there in the Blue Ridge Parkway area.
Okay, I live off of 80, which is a well-known area for people to ride to check out the Blue Ridge. It cuts directly onto the Blue Ridge Parkway. We have the Devil's Whip, just a lot of fun stuff to do here if you're into riding motorcycles. I actually have the Appalachian Trail going through my backyard. And since the hurricane, we've had a lot of increased activities from trees broken in half that weren't broken before the hurricane. Keep in mind that we didn't have anybody up here working at the time, so they would be pushed certain ways. Claw marks extremely high up on trees. I don't know what that would be from. We have little black bears. They're not that big here. And from seeing shadows, especially when I take my dogs out at night, of tall entities walking through the woods, hearing like footsteps and things like that, to the howls, the hoots is what you would call it, or whoops.
Yep.
To even alien type activity. I'm about 30 minutes from Brown Mountain. We've actually had lights show up. We would sit out on the front porch and they would come down the valley. We have a nice view of Mount Mitchell. And through the valley, the lights would appear out of nowhere. No reason for lights, no cars out that way. To just things disappearing and moving. During the hurricane, we kept our house unlocked because we were letting volunteers use it as a staging area. So that way they could get what they needed, supplies. They had somewhere to sleep, somewhere where they could get to comfortably. Before they came in, they noticed that things were moved around. It looked like they found some weird fur, massive footprints, things like that. It's funny, but we said we wonder if Bigfoot came and chilled at the house while we were gone. Because we were gone for about 3 weeks right after the hurricane. And this was before
okay, I get it. Yep.
This is before anybody had access to the house. And we have a graveyard, a family-owned graveyard from the 1800s, not our family, about 200 yards from our back door. All the time we see shadows and stuff down there. Talking about cats, I have 2 outdoor cats. One came with the house and one was left. and they were taken care of. I don't know who took care of them, but somebody took care of the cats the whole time we were gone. And
Oh,
I live
wow.
off of out in the middle of nowhere. You would not be able to find my house unless you knew it was there. That's how secluded I am. We just got power back this past week.
And we probably don't want to. Could you say maybe? I'm not going to ask for location. I'm sorry. So just by the Blue Ridge Parkway, Devil's Whip
So,
area,
yeah, I'll just say Sea County, North
Nancy
Carolina.
County.
So
Okay.
right
All
there
right.
at the North Carolina Tennessee line. And you can pull up the Blue Ridge Parkway and check it out. There's been
Yeah.
known abductions and alien sightings and just all sorts of wild stuff out here.
Oh,
Apparently, they say
yeah.
there's
Yeah.
skinwalkers out here. We've heard animal sounds, and I've grown up in North Carolina my entire life. Sounds that would have scared us. My husband is a Marine, and several times things have happened from people. We don't know if it's a person going through cars, but keep in mind, my closest neighbor is an elderly man about a half a mile away.
Hmm.
Car doors
Oh,
would be
wow.
a battery, the battery for my husband's truck. If somebody opens the door and doesn't shut it right, because it's a pretty old truck, the battery would die. So if somebody would open the car looking for stuff and come back outside and the
Yep.
car door's still open or the battery's dead. We've seen shadows go past the windows, and the shadows would be massive. They would take up the majority of the window.
How big
We're
are your
on this.
windows?
They're pretty high. I'm up on the side of Mount Mitchell. I'm about, I think it was 3,000 feet above elevation. It gets cold up here and snows often. But lots of wild stuff. We've been putting food out not only for our cats, but just to see if somebody would take it. I've left 2 bags of uneaten grapes out on the porch just to see if they're going in the morning.
I would say be very careful doing that. The trick is that when you start doing that and then you stop doing it, that's when it can cause some big issues. But I get how you're trying to feed the cats as well.
Yeah, and I just see where somebody said the Appalachian Trail
Right.
the part of the trail that goes through our backyard has been completely changed.
Mm.
Big boulders from the top of the mountain have come down, rocks everywhere. They're finding all sorts of stuff they didn't know was there, from caves to we found a gold nugget, or at least it probably isn't, but lots of wild stuff is being found.
You
There's
found a gold nugget?
Yes, on the
Oh,
Appalachian
wow.
Trail since the hurricane. In fact, when the mudslide started, we had vibrations here at the house. We thought we were having an earthquake. And so we just happened to be where we were at the river, or the water flowed on each side of the house, but didn't touch the house. I'll be glad to send you pictures so you can see what was a tiny
Yeah,
stream
absolutely.
turned into a river.
Oh, boy.
So lots of stuff has been unearthed, lots of stuff has been changed.
I have a few questions for you. They say how large the footprints were, the people that were using your house and helping out.
From the pictures and from what he explained, it was barefoot and it was much bigger than him, and he wears a size 12.
All right, it's happening. Yeah, I knew these were going to start coming in. Do you have a way to contact that person?
Yeah, I sure do.
Would you be able to reach out on to see if they would be up for talking about it?
Sure, I will give them
Okay.
a message here later and see if I can get them to come on. I know they were busy. A lot of us have been doing a lot of volunteer work
Yeah,
because the
absolutely.
devastation here is much worse than what's being shown. Much worse.
Or you can even pass on my email too. That might make it easier for them. You said they saw fur as well.
Yes, long, darkish black fur, blackish brown. He said, and it smelled horrible.
Oh, okay. Just the fur, or were there things attached to it? Skin, flesh?
For some reason, he picked up the fur and smelled it. I don't know. I wouldn't know
Okay.
why. Yeah,
Or
and actually, my foster pup is in heat too. So there's been
okay.
more activity, but nothing, no coyotes, no wolves, nothing like that, no bears.
Were these guys that were from the area, or were they from different parts of the country?
Correct, yes. They were
Different parts.
volunteers coming in,
Yeah.
veterans that volunteered to come in to help move people out because we found areas where there were 230 people in a church stranded with no access
Oh
to
my
fresh food
goodness.
or water.
Wow. And it's still extremely bad down there, isn't it?
The energy out here is changed. It's more chaotic, but
Okay.
sometimes it's extremely chaotic, and then sometimes it's very comforting. I've actually had a near death experience
Hmm.
a couple years ago, and sometimes I feel and see things that I don't know if it's from the brain injury or if it's I'm speaking stuff into existence. But like I said, the energy has changed out here. We have heard footsteps on our back porch when there's nobody here. Nobody whatsoever.
Do you
And I'll be glad
hear?
later to send you pictures of the house and everything. We have
Sure.
a
Yeah.
half a mile uphill climb to get to the house.
Okay.
So
Do you ever hear things from the woods, like your names being said, or whistles, or
we
wood
hear
knocks?
whistles. We hear knocks all the time. My son, bless his heart, my father grew up telling him he was going to be a Bigfoot hunter. And so my dad would take them
Awesome.
outside and they would hide Jack Link's jerky outside and knock on trees and hoot and holler and everything. And it's funny because my grandmother could not say Sasquatch, so she always
Hmm.
called him Snatchcrotch. So for the
There you go.
longest time, we've always said, "Up, Snatchcrotch is coming to get you." But that's a whole story in itself. He has gone outside and knocked on trees. I've even done it, and you'll hear knocks back.
How
You
quickly?
get within at least a minute, 30
Okay.
seconds or longer.
Yeah.
I've heard screams. Like I said, I know there's coyote and stuff in this, but I know what a coyote scream sounds like. This sounds like a human, but it's deeper. If that it's got more power to it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Any other weird things ever heard from the woods that would not belong?
We've seen taking pictures outside at night, and you'd see two eyes up high
Okay.
in the trees. You'd have that kind of a bluish green eye shine, laughing. And yeah, we have heard laughing several times, mumbling like somebody was talking, but you
Hmm.
couldn't understand them. So it's like that.
Oh, I know what you mean.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Ever anything crying?
yes, my dogs, especially the foster one that we have, if she goes outside and she gets spooked, so she's always checking her boundaries. She came from a bad situation. For the past week, every time, maybe 2 weeks now, yeah, about 2 weeks now, every time she goes outside, she looks around and barks. She'll bark 2 or 3 times, and if she hears or feels something, she's immediately back in the house.
Wow. That is very intense. And this has been happening for years, or for how long?
So I've
All
been
this
here two
stuff.
years up here,
Two
but
years.
I've been
Okay.
in North Carolina the majority of my life.
Okay.
I'm originally coastal.
Gotcha. Have there ever been any sightings of Bigfoot around the area where you're at?
Marion, North Carolina has the Bigfoot Festival each summer.
True. So, yeah, you're saying definitely, yeah, there's been sightings. Oh, have you heard any other stories of people that were noticing things that could be Bigfoot related after the hurricane?
Majority of our neighbors have noticed things have shifted, moved, things aren't where they left them. Like folks have been plundering. But here's the thing,
Right.
we where we live, it's very rural. The road was completely washed out. There was no way to get back here unless you had four-wheel drive or an ATV or you attempted to walk it. So for people to get trees or big cut trees that they had moved is odd.
Right. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't, people aren't just going to be randomly going up there. It'd have to be something else, is what I'm
Right.
hearing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
After the hurricane, it took almost 5 or 6 days for us to get evacuated, and that was a medevac.
Oh my goodness. If you start hearing things from, oh, she's out. Okay. That's unfortunate. I had other things to ask. She's going to probably reach out through email. At the time of editing, November 20th, 2024, this individual has not reached out with any further information or emails. If they're listening, they're invited to do so by contacting me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Also, if there are other individuals that have noticed increased Bigfoot activity that seemed connected to the hurricane, please reach out, bigfootsociety@gmail.com. So, Hanny, what did you experience during that storm flood?
Okay, well, I lived on a river, and the water was really high. And in fact, it was so high that it was a big flood. It was in let's see, I think it was in 97. Anyway, there was a warning alarm on the television back then. Remember when it used to, do you know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
So the TV was on. We were all sleeping out in the living room because the flood was really big. The flood was so huge you could hear trees crashing through the water and stuff. It was so we had a flood storm warning thing on, and it came on in the middle of the night. And so I bolted up in bed and heard this big crash in the back of my back deck looking over the river, and here he came just crawling right over the railing and took down the railing and a planter and just lumbered right across my porch. He'd only took 3 big steps, looked right over through the sliding glass door, and then vanished into the forest 10 feet away from me.
Oh, my goodness. Would you be able to share what state this took place in?
It was in Southern Oregon, close to the California border.
So, are we talking like down by Grants Pass or farther south?
Okay. As a crow flies, pretty close to Grants Pass. That's the same surrounding
Okay.
area, but in the wilderness mountainside.
I'm not surprised at all. Yeah.
My interest in investigation, just personally, I kind of believe that they're interdimensional as far as their speed goes, and the way that he was walking. I have heard from, I used to listen, there used to be a Bigfoot line on the talk radio that I listened to all the time up in that area.
Oh, wow. Nice.
And so they encouraged us to like take a stick and bang it 3 times on a tree to listen for a shout back. And there was a lot of activity going on in the forest during that time period. Supposedly they were on the move up to British Columbia.
Did you get a good look at its face when it came over the railing?
Yeah. I got a good
Oh,
look at
wow.
I got a good look at the whole thing. It was almost as if it was in slow motion. I mean, it was close. I could hear the whole thing. It was clumsy. When he went over the railing, he stumbled, knocked it over, and then knocked over the planter. So he turned his head and looked down, and it was kind of in slow motion. But then when he got off of my deck and went into the woods, it seemed as if he just disappeared.
What color was it?
Kind of similar to what my llamas looked like, where it was like calico, kind of light calico. Do you know what I mean? Like with
Yeah.
really woolly, like dready.
Okay, so like the hair on it almost looked like dreads, you're saying?
Yeah.
That is extremely interesting. I've actually taken reports from up in the Willamette National Forest where there was a group of people that were chased away from what they said were two Sasquatch that looked like they had dreads. So that's extremely interesting. You said that.
Wow.
Um, do you remember any details about what you saw in the phase area?
Well, the eyes were kind of yellowish. But there was so much hair, and he turned around and looked over his shoulder at the planter and then turned towards the door, the sliding glass door that I was looking through. But there was no like ear bumps or, there wasn't really any features around the head.
Yeah, absolutely. Shape for the head at all?
Kind of longish, elongated forehead.
Right.
Right.
You had mentioned that there was a lot of other activity going on in the area. What other kind of things were happening in the woods during that time?
Well, there's this whole area that is kind of above where I live where there's a thing called the Bigfoot trap. And it was built years ago. So you're familiar with it, with where I'm talking about then?
That is a very, if you're in the community, that's kind of like a legendary area. Yeah, you can still go to it, I believe.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's still very much there. It's really simple. But the trees are just smashed over in that whole area. It's been so long ago now, as far as what was going on the talk radio and stuff. The experience is like yesterday, but as far as what I was listening to, and it was always late night after Art Bell. It was a big, hairy, man-like form. I mean, I would say, if you're going to close your eyes and imagine what Bigfoot would look like, that is what it looked like. There was no other animal features, like there wasn't an elongated nose, there wasn't perked up ears, there wasn't any of that. It was really like a human form kind of a looking thing. Just large and in slow motion, very heavy, very heavy. I mean, it shook my porch. But he looked like he was running.
From how fast it was going, or is that more from the movements?
By the way that his body was moving and the way that, his foot caught the railing, tipped it over. He was in a hurry, and it was during that. I mean, there were boulders rolling down the river. It ended up being, they opened the floodgates of the Applegate Dam that night.
Oh, wow.
It was a huge...
So it was just like, get me out of there, pretty much.
Yeah, or, I mean, I've often thought if they were rounding up family, or, I mean, what was he doing on my back porch?
Right. Exactly.
I had like a deck that overlooked this salmon spawning swimming hole. It was a beautiful part of the river. Pretty big gorge,
Perfect place as well for them to, it's a great food source. Was anyone else there with you to see it, or were you alone at that time?
Well, I wasn't alone, but I was asleep on the living room floor doing, staying watch to make sure that we didn't need to evacuate. So I just had my two girls next to me in bed. But when the planter fell off of the railing, it woke up my 3-year-old. But she didn't see anything. It was just that the porch was crashing, And there was the big ee going off in the TV. It was a very chaotic moment in time.
Well, Hanny, thank you so much for coming up and for sharing what happened that night. back in the 90s. I really appreciate you coming up.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Have a great night. Thanks for coming up. So is it Sonia?
Yes.
Cool. And so you had something weird happen in Tahoe National Forest?
Yes.
What happened out there in that forest?
Yes. So we had been partying and camping up there. It was always a group of us. Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay. So it was always like 10, 20 of us. I'm a barber, so it was always like our two barber shops and friends and family that we would go up there with. So at nighttime, so we wouldn't disrupt the rest of the campers, we would all, whoever wanted to go, at night we would walk up to this waterfall that was like a quarter mile up, and you had to walk through this paved road, because there's people that live up in the mountain, but you have campgrounds off to certain sections and very secluded. So we had to walk up this road, and then you come up to this waterfall. And so we would be up there partying all night. And the 6th year, we were up there, and I decided to go use the bathroom, so I had to walk back, and we all had like little lamps on our heads, or you could carry a lamp. So I was walking back by myself, and I'm a runner, so I was lightly jogging back, and it was again that road, that quarter mile stretch, and I was just jogging, feeling so good. And all of a sudden, it's as if all my hair stood up all over my body, and I stopped instantly on my tracks, and I winced, and I like flinched, and it just felt like something was upon me. And I stopped, and I instantly remembered there's bears in that forest. And I was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to run? What to do? Scream, holler, what do I do? And I started hearing breathing. And I looked to my left, because that's like the mountain more now it's to my left. And to my right is the river, like from the waterfall. That's where the water's coming. So you could hear the waterfall. But in that moment, I didn't hear water. I didn't hear anything. It's as if all I could hear was my heartbeat in my eardrums. And it was my blood and all my senses. My whole skin was tingling. I didn't know what to do. I was stuck there. And so I look up. I couldn't see anything, but I sensed or felt it was big, humongous. I didn't know what it was. Again, like me telling it, my skin is crawling, because I started walking. I was like, just walk and keep moving. Whatever you do, keep moving. I remember, move your feet. Keep moving. And I kept looking up, and I was like, is it a bear? Is it a bear? Is it going to run after me? What do I do? What do I do? And I kept looking, and all I could hear was this inhaling and exhaling. I don't know how bears inhale and exhale. I don't know what they sound like, but it did not seem as if it was located. This breathing was as if it was the whole mountain breathing. I kept moving. It never came at me. I never heard no branch, no movement, nothing. All I sensed was inhaling and exhaling, and the inhaling and exhaling was following me. So it wasn't moving. It was as if the head was moving. From what I felt, it like all my hearing was hyper alert, like on its 10th sense, volume 10.
Wow.
is what I was hearing. And I went to the bathroom. I came back to the camper and I was telling everybody, and they were like, "You're high." What the? I started cussing them out. I'm telling them, "You guys, don't go over there by yourselves." I'm telling you, nobody would listen to me. Everybody was, we're listening to music, they're dancing, blah, 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 braiding each other's hair. Nobody would listen to me. And so now I'm looking like I'm totally crazy, because every time somebody's like, "Oh, we're going to go to the bathroom," I kept following them. And I was telling everybody, "Watch out." Nobody would listen. And I was coming back and forth. I was so tired. I couldn't even run back and forth. Anyways, that's my story. I don't know what to tell you. Nobody believed me. I feel even silly telling you. And I don't believe it was a bear. I don't know what it was, but it was as if the whole mountain was breathing. And it was so scary. Anyways, thank you for listening.
Was it yeah, thank you for sharing. Was it close to Truckee at all?
Truckee way past there. It was
Okay.
Cal Ida, Tahoe National Forest.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, Tate, I think like Lake Tahoe is a great area. Tom Yamarone and Bob Strain recorded calls. Yeah, absolutely, Tate. Well, Sonia, thank you for coming up and for sharing what you experienced that
Yeah,
night.
never be alone, you guys. When you go camping,
Absolutely.
anywhere you go with somebody. Don't die alone.
That's good advice, actually. Yeah. Have a buddy system. So thanks, Sonia.
Yes. Thank you.
Hey, DC, thanks for coming up. How's it going?
Hey, what's up, buddy?
Hey, do you mind if I potentially use this audio for my podcast? Feel free to share what you experienced up there in northern Arizona.
Okay. I wasn't actually there. It was told by my friends, but these friends I've known for like over 30 years. Flagstaff, Williams area. So my buddies told me they went up there to go hunting. They had scouted the area, like weeks before they headed out. So they parked out on the side of the road. So they're like, okay, let's grab our equipment, let's head out. So they tell me that they get out the vehicle and they're walking into the woods. So when they start getting into the woods, it's not really thick yet until they start probably about a quarter mile. They start getting dense woods surrounding. So it was my buddy, his father, and a cousin. So it was three of them. So when they were out there, they saw someone running, kind of like a speed walk almost. It was the other hunter.
Okay.
So this hunter was coming out and approached them, and he started telling my friend and his dad and them, "Hey, we need to get out of here. Let's get me out of here." And they were like, "Why? What's wrong? What are you talking about?" And he just says, "No, I'll tell you when we get here." He says, just get me to the road." He says, "My car is down like 5 miles down the road," because where he was at, he had to head in a different direction, right? So he told him, "I'll pay you $100 if you guys take me down the road and give me my truck." They're like, "All right." So they head back to the truck, and they noticed that the guy kept on looking back, and then they were kind of started feeling uncomfortable, he said. So they started looking around their surroundings and all that. So when they get to the truck, he said the guy just bolted out. He didn't even man, the guy just left, and he said, I guess he didn't want the ride after all. My buddy, he has a really keen eyesight. He could see things from far away, and he could pick up smell pretty good. So he said when they were right there, okay, what was that all about, So that my friend, he tells me that he smelled this odor, and he said it smelled like a wet dog. Like it was like the smell was just like so powerful. He was like, man, what is that smell? Like, is there a skunk or something around here? So what he told me he saw, he turned around, they started looking into the brush. He said it was about close to about 100 yards from their vehicle now. So when they were like, okay, what is that? You know, they couldn't see it. So my buddy said he got his scope and he put the scope on what he saw. And what he described to me, he said it was about 8 foot tall. The shoulders were like he said about 6 foot wide or larger. So when he saw this thing, he said it had its back towards him. So he was telling me, he said the color, he said, do you know what a silverback, like a gorilla? He said it had that similar color. But it wasn't a gorilla. So he said like it was above like the brush and all that. It stood there for like about a few minutes, and then he was just following it back into the woods with the scope. So when he finally told me this, he didn't tell me this until like maybe like a few years ago. He didn't want to tell nobody like outside of his family who saw it, because he figured that people would think he was BSing or like, what are you talking about,
Right.
But yeah, that's what he saw, and I totally believe him. And oh yeah, so prior to that, they had went to the ranger's office to go report this. So when they told him that, the rangers had told him 2 weeks before that, someone else had put a report that they had saw a Sasquatch in the area. The area is it's really dense. So it's in Arizona. I don't know if you've ever been to Arizona, but it's really up north. They got a lot of the woods, and it gets pretty thick and everything.
I'm familiar with Arizona. Up in the northern part of it, you have the Mogollon Rim, right?
The Mogollon. They even call it. Sometimes they even call it the Mogollon Monster or
Exactly. Is that where this took place?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's sightings there, and then there's the last sighting I heard was in what was it? San Carlos, like on the reservation.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of different sightings, but it's all more of the sightings are up north. Down here in the valley, you don't hear nothing. But once you hear you head to the woods out there where it's like really no one out there, that's where they see it at. And and I believe him. Like I said, I've known him 30 years, so I believe him. And I told him, dude, you should have went somewhere and told your story, and because it was a pretty good high powered scope. And he said like the hair on it, he said it looked more like hair than a fur. It wasn't very thick at all. And like I said, he thinks it was an older Sasquatch because of the way it was colored, the silver, how men get that salty gray beard. That's what he said. But yeah,
Absolutely.
That's what I heard. No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Thank you, DC, for coming up and sharing your friend's story. I appreciate it. You have a great rest of your night.
You too. Thanks.
Appreciate everyone hanging out tonight. We had a crazy, awesome crowd tonight. Guys, make sure that you are following this account for more lives where we get people to come up and talk about their Bigfoot encounters. Make sure you follow my friend Tate. Is he's doing mod work right now. I appreciate you being here, bud. And Tate Hieronymus is a great Bigfoot researcher where he has a documentary series called Sasquatch: The Search for Sabe. You can see clips of that on his account, so make sure you follow Tate. He's in the comments right now. Also on YouTube, you can watch the whole episodes. So if you look up the Tate Hieronymus YouTube channel as well. Let's see, I live in East Texas, and my wife and I are off the gridders that actually live in the middle of the Piney Woods. Okay, great area. Yeah, that's a super squatchy area. I'm going to send Simply an invite to see if this individual is okay. Here we go. Hey, Simply, thanks for coming up. Sounds like you've been having some things going on up there in your area. Feel free to share what you've experienced out there.
Well, it's my wife's family's property. It's 40 acres. We decided to go live out, and I talked her into let's do this. You know, we're spending way too much money. So I'm out here. I go out here and I start clearing land. This is the first incident, and I hear it's like 3 a.m, and there's a big tree that just like you could hear it splinter, like a million toothpicks breaking. I was like, what the heck? No wind. It happened 2 nights in a row. I went back and looked. I left that night because it freaked me out. Went back and looked. It was 2 cedar trees, big cedar trees, tall ones. They were broke about 15 foot up. Just the tops broke completely off from them. Well, once we got settled in, we basically had an outhouse to start with. Every time my wife would go out to go to the bathroom, you would hear, it sounded almost like coyotes that turned into owls that in the end turned into monkey chatter. And there's about 4 of them. Very, very strange. We hear trees being pushed over constantly. One incident when we first were out there, I left her there I had a camper. I left her at the camper. I went into town to go get some stuff. I always make noises in the woods, like what would a Sasquatch might make. And I always whoop. Well, I left for the store. I come back and I couldn't find my wife. She was hidden under the blankets in the camper. I said, what are you doing? It's like 90 degrees out. She said, well, you left, and you know that stupid noise you always make at the woods, whooping sound? I was like, yeah. She's like, as soon as you left, it started up. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I know I'm just jumping around trying to hit a few. My stories are many, but I'm trying to hit a few of them.
Absolutely.
My dog. I've had her since she's a puppy, and she's my, she's the protector of the property. You know, she's the coyote getter. So she's not afraid. She's not afraid of anything. She gets the job done. Well, if I start making whooping noises at the woods, this dog gets so nervous and won't even look at woods at all. And that's her home. That's where she lives. She's not an inside dog. She lives outside because she does what she does. I start making them whooping noise, the dog, she'll start pacing back and forth and won't even look in the woods. She don't like it. Let's see. There's just so many of them. Nightly, if I'm out there burning the land off, you know, burning the dead off the ground, the dead foliage and stuff, that's when there's a lot of action that really happens. Like you will start hearing the owl. It starts off like an owl sometimes, but it's not owls. And they'll just chatter back and forth for a long time until either I put the fire out or what I assume they feel that it's not going to cause them any harm. But it's just, it'll go on for hours if I'm out there burning. It's crazy. And you're right. East Texas is like one of the highest reported sightings of Sasquatch.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And it's just crazy. It's crazy the noises we hear. I sometimes think I see them, but they're just like a dark, because they're always way far away when I do think I see them. And it's like a tall, just a darkness, like standing next to a tree where you should be able to see past the tree. You don't. And so I guess that's a few of my stories. They go on forever. If there's anybody, I'll just say this one last thing. My wife was a non-believer. She used to laugh at me constantly when I'd start talking about Bigfoot, because I'm a believer of everything that people don't believe in. So I always talk about him, and she used to laugh at me and poke fun at me, and she will tell you now, and she will sit here and tell you the same story. And she believes now. She definitely believes that there is a Bigfoot out there, or a Sasquatch, or whatever you want to call them.
Current day, you're saying?
Oh yes, absolutely. We've been out here for 2.5 years, and this kind of stuff. I don't know. I'm not going to tell you I see them every day,
right?
Because I don't. But there is some kind of activity that you have to sit back and be like, okay, well, I know that. Oh, okay, here we go. I'm sorry, I just remembered this. I have had rocks thrown at me, but not hard. Just thrown light enough to hit the back of my calf and fall down to the ground. And the first time it happened, I was like, what was that? And I turned around, it hit my calf, bounced off, but I seen a rock moving when I turned around. I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. Maybe I get up. Turned back around, started walking. It happened again, and it was a little bit higher up on my back of my thigh. I was like, okay, no, that's not, I'm not kicking them up. The next thing that was thrown at me was and we figured out what it was, but it was a piece of pine bark, from a big tree, but it looked like someone had sat there and rubbed it held it in their hand and rubbed it with their thumb. And it was a perfect flat, almost like a blade, but smooth. And that was thrown at me. And that actually hit me in the back. And there's nothing else out there. Like, I showed it to my brother, and the first thing he said, he's like, you sat there and rubbed that thing with your thumb for days. I said, no, sir, I didn't. He's like, well, that's exactly what it looks like. That someone sat there and rubbed it with their thumb. And both sides were that way, smooth. And it was like, almost like a blade, like a knife blade.
Weird vibes about this one, dude. Like, this is some weird stuff you're dealing with, dude.
But you know what? I'll tell you this. My wife and I, neither one of us, we do not feel threatened. I do not feel a threat. I mean, there was a couple other things. There was one time we're, like I said, we're in the middle of the woods. We actually live in the middle of the woods. We have a house. The Veterans Restart Ministry built us a house out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have a house. It's not now we do. We've been out here for 2.5 years. But I think it was maybe 8 months ago, we were outside, and there was just this strong, heavy smell of leather. Like we walked into a leather shop. It was that strong. And it only lasted for, I'm going to say, 35 minutes or so. And then it was gone. Like, there was never no leather smell. Very strange.
How close is your closest neighbor?
Let's see. Not close enough to where I could smell their dinner when they're cooking it.
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Do you know if have you ever talked to people that relatively live close to you to see if they have stuff going on, or is it something you just don't talk about?
Um, no, I talk to it about everybody, but it's everybody else that don't like talking about it.
Gotcha. Yep.
You know
Yep.
what I mean?
Oh
This is
yeah, I get it.
my wife's child. I mean, her mother grew up on this property. She grew up on this property, and the one thing that my wife told me that was it caught me off guard really a little bit. I never met her grandfather, but everything I've heard about him is he wasn't a scared man, except for when it came to the nighttime, and he would not go outside on that property nowhere. And they lived in a house right off the highway on the same
Oh
property.
wow.
And he would not go out at night. She said he was scared to go out at night. He just wouldn't do it. So, yeah. But again, like I said, we do not feel threatened. I don't. The weirdest thing that really happened was my wife. I was inside. She went out. She went to go to the bathroom, and she calls me. I answer the phone, and she's like, "Where are you at?" I said, "I'm in the house." She's like, "No, you're not." I said, "No, yeah, really, I'm inside." I call her mama, is what I call my wife. I say, "Hey, mama," or "Let's go, mama," whatever. That's what I call her. She said that something was just on the other side of our house, and it was like, it was clear as day. She said, it said, "Hey, mama," and she thought it was me. And it wasn't nobody there, because people don't come out. This is Texas. You don't go fooling around like that with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
exactly.
will be hurt. So
Yep.
it wasn't no person. Things like that happen all the time out here to this day.
If you start hearing that from the woods, don't go in the woods, please. I mean,
Well, and see, that's my wife. She gets so upset with me because I do it all the time.
yeah.
Like I go,
Okay.
because we have a creek, our freshwater spring creek. That's where I get our water from. So I mean, I bring up 30 gallons a day every day, but there's just times where sometimes you got to go down there, or sometimes I'll see lights back there, and I'm like, why does I see lights? So I'll go down there. But again, I don't feel threatened, man. I did. There's no part of me that gets the chills, like how you would if there was a threat.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I just don't feel that. I don't feel that, and nor does she. She don't feel that way either. However, she will not go down in the woods at night, ever. She thinks I'm crazy for doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, wow. Man, this is absolutely wild.
That's some of my story. Where are you from?
I'm up in central Iowa.
See, now I used to live in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Anamosa, Iowa, eastern Iowa.
There's some weird stuff out there.
There's some pretty strange stuff. I never heard a lot, but I seen signs of, why is that tree broken where it's broken?
Yep, exactly.
A healthy tree.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, there's a lot of Bigfoot stuff in northeast and southeast Iowa. But sir, would you be able to send me an email? My email's up there. Just and say like, hey, I'm the guy talked to you from East Texas with the stuff going on his property, just in case I have a question for you in the future.
I will definitely. I think I've been following you for a while now. Okay. So I will definitely send you my email address, and yes, you can contact me anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming up and for sharing. I appreciate it, and be safe out there.
Don, thank you for having me. Goodbye.
All right. Let's see. We got Just has something to share here. Let's bring him up. Hey, Just, how's it going? Thanks for coming up. How are you doing today, sir?
Oh, I'm doing good. Sorry I couldn't get on the other day, but had to wait till last night.
Oh, yeah, no problem. So feel free to share what you've experienced out there.
Well, you say you work with the Bigfoot I can't remember their names, the ones that first came out and started doing it, but they went up to Leadville and they were talking to Trujillo. His brother used to do my carpets. And anyway, me and a couple of my buddies, because he's seen him down on the bottom part of Albert there, because his dad owned or bought some property out there. But anyway, from my experience, me and a couple of my buddies one day decided to go up to Mount Zion, which is off 24 when you're headed towards Vail. And
Okay,
anyway,
Colorado.
Yeah, in Colorado there. And, well, when you get down to the river and you come up on the other side, they got a turn off there. I used to work for the Forest Service up there for a while. But anyway, we decided to go up onto Mount Zion. So we takes about 20, 30 minutes to get up there. But anyway, we got up to the top and it flattens out. And so you can get out and you can walk over and look down into Buckeye Lake. And that was one of the lakes we stocked with the Yellowstone cutthroat. But anyway, me and my buddy were there. He decided to go back over because there was three of us, and one of them, Daryl and them, stayed over at the truck. And I was sitting there looking down at the lake, and it's not really a lake; it's like a pond up there. But anyway, it's down off of the cliffs, and I seen something move right there on the water, right on the shore part of the water, and I looked down, and it stood up, and it was like. I know a lot of people say they see the black ones. Well, this one wasn't. And he was like, I don't know, 8 something. He was huge. But he knew I was there. He looked up at me. He could see me up on the cliff part of it. Well, they got like a rock slide over on the other side coming down into the pond or up into the Buckeye Lake. But like I said, it ain't like a huge lake. But anyway, he looked up and he was looking at me and I was looking at him, and then my buddy Greg had already headed back over to the Jeep. But it wasn't like I watched him and I seen him through the bushes for 2 seconds. I watched him and still instead of going towards, you would think he would go towards because we were up at Timberline. You think he would have went over towards the Timberline, but he didn't. He started coming up the rock slide off to, up on the other side. And I'm a mountain boy. I mean, I know what it takes to climb it up. I'm a former Marine, but that thing started climbing up the side of that hill like I ain't never seen nothing. So I sat there and watched him for about 15 minutes. I figured, I had enough sense to know that if he can get up that side of that mountain, that rock slide like that, you don't want to be there when he hits the top, because wouldn't have been that much for him to come around. So that's when I left. And I took off. I went back, told my buddies, told Greg, I said, did you see that? And he goes, what? I said, you didn't see that thing down over there? And he goes, nope. I said, well, it was right after he walked off that it came up. Now, the interesting part of this is, okay, that right there on Mount Zion is like on one side of where the Climax Molybdenum Company is, Climax Mine. Okay? Well, you were always able to go up, if you went up over to the mine top part there on the pass, you could actually go over there and fish in Chalk Lake, right? They had the access into there, so they never really closed those gates. They couldn't, because they had just leased that property off of the government. So anyway, about a week and a half later, I got to thinking, I said, well, I'm going to go down through there off to the other side. Nope, they closed it up. So I said, wait a minute. I stopped, went up there to Climax to the part, and I asked him, how come we can't get down into Chalk Lake anymore? He said, no, it's just closed. I said, well, I didn't think you could close that, but all right. So I figured I'd come back over on the other side. It's Camp Hale, right? You're on 24, you come down at the old 10 Mountain Division. Used to be able to drive in there too, right? And you could go all the way to the backside and go up and through there because there's some really good fishing up in there, up in the beaver ponds. They had dug a tunnel. I mean, they had dug a trench that you couldn't get through. I don't care what kind of a vehicle you had. So they cut that whole access off. This is about 3 weeks after I seen this thing. Evidently somebody else must have, because they had it, and they're still to this day. They've cut access back there. There's one guy, he was from Texas, and I think he had some agreements down there where he could take them up there four-wheeling and those little whatever 4x4 things. He's the only one still allowed to go back through there, and the wintertime he does like skiing excursions back there. But he's the only one allowed back up in there. They shut that whole access off to that whole thing. And you're talking about many, many miles. So somebody seen something and they cut off total access for you to, you can look it up. I guarantee you can't get back in there. So I don't know why. And you know, I was born in Pueblo, but raised up there in Leadville. And we always had access to that. And it was just shortly after I'd seen what I saw that they cut it all off. You can't even get back up in there. So it had to be the government to shut it off.
It would make sense. So you were saying that you were able to see it for about 15 minutes?
Yeah, well, no, I watched him for a little longer than that. It took him about 15 minutes to get up there because he kept looking at me. He still stayed.
Wow. Okay.
He was by the shore, and he was doing something in the water. But you know what? Like everybody always says, oh, they're black or that. No, you know, it was wild because when he stood up, and like I said, I got a pretty good sight. He was huge. But the only thing that I could see that kind of offset me because he was like orange, like an orangutan, orange. But then the only thing I could really see was right where his chest was. You can see a little bit of skin. You know, the hair was there, but you could see a little bit of skin on each side of his chest. And it was like, but he sat there and watched me, man. He was watching me and I was watching him. And then, but like I said, you know, you would think he would be afraid or not want to be seen, but he didn't do that. He went right up to the rock slide because he could easily slip down into the, you know, the timberline there, but he didn't do it. I guess he wasn't, let's say, upset by well, he was moving off cautiously, but he wasn't upset. You know what I mean? But he just kept looking back, looking up, looking. It's like, so I thought it was pretty interesting anyway. But I'll tell you what, that was the day that I believed because up until then I didn't.
Yeah, I mean,
that too.
if you're ever going to believe, that's the day for sure. Do you remember any details about looking at the face of what you saw that day?
Oh, I could see his face. You know, yeah, he had the long hair. And he, you know how the little be shuffled, let's say. But yeah, I could see his face. And he did. You know, a lot of these guys get it pretty correct on what they look. But you know, when they were talking to, he was talking about, I think he said he black one, but where his dad owned that land and where he inherited it, when he let them dogs out, I remember that story too. He had never told me, but like I said, his brother used to do our carpets because we managed up there, me and my wife. And I went to middle school there, from middle school on up, and but we used to go camping. Where he was talking about is down by the golf course, and then it takes you around over to the fish hatchery, because that property he has is right off the other side of that. But if you go up a little bit down where the golf course is, the backside of that, you can get to the backside of Turquoise Lake, which the dam is there, and you can come in through the back. I could tell you another story over there too. That guy said he was writing a book. I don't know if he ever did it, but you could just go back into that part. And, you know, at night, you don't, you know, we were young boys. We didn't want to get creeped out, but oh yeah, you get a feeling, you know, when they're around, everything goes silent. And I mean, way silent. And you can just feel it. And I never did like camping back there. And that's not far off of where he said that he seen, where he let his dogs off and his dogs went down and ran them into the woods, because behind there is, I can't remember his name, but his family had been there forever. He was a sheriff deputy. His dad owned that property where Trujillo bought a little slice of it. But anywhere back in through there, if you go in camping and that, you just never felt right. You know, you just carry your pew. You know what I mean? Because you know,
right. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, there's nothing. There was something in there just wasn't right.
Sounds like this area has a whole bunch of activity going on.
I think so too, because I mean, for real, I used to like fishing in Chalk Lake, but they cut the whole road. You got to understand, like if you go up to the top of Climax Mine, that's where the entrance is on one side. It comes out on the 10th Mountain Division, what used to be the Camp Hill, the one that they shut down. And you could drive that all the way through there. And so it would take you through these really cool beaver ponds. And then, of course, you're coming off the hill there. So it was just beautiful down in there. But I remember another time being down in there with my wife and my daughter. And I went to go fishing back up in there to hit those ponds. And so my wife got out and told me she was going to walk my daughter down the road a ways. And I said, okay, well, I'm just going to hit the ponds real quick because they ain't that far off. Just got to go through the Willers. And So I started to walk through there, and she took off walking with her. And by the time I got my pole and everything all ready, I went to walk off through there, and I lived up on the side of that hill, and that part of the forest, or right, that road going down into you got the old growth. You know what I mean? You can see splashes up on the side of the hill, and then getting up into the timbers. And there was a group of trees in there. And this is another one and that's in the same area, but actually I got to go, it was through that road that they cut off. I was about halfway through. And I looked up and I seen this thing, this tree, but I mean, it was in the middle of the tree, the group of trees, but it was the middle tree. And that thing was just moving, man. You could see it just wow, 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 wow. And it's like, there ain't no way, there's no, because I even went after that, I called down to the Forest Service, and I asked him, I said, you ever heard any grizzlies being in Colorado? And he's like, no, I don't think so. I said, well, I've never heard of it either. I said, but able to move that tree that I just seen, because I told him the story. I said, and able to move that tree, that thing would have had to been way huge. You know what I'm saying? I said, I don't even think a grizzly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's been a few, for instances, with me in there, and that was just me growing up around there. Because that ain't far. That's the road going down towards Vale, But and it was all within that area. Yep, and they cut that off. It used to be the old road going up to Leadville, and then they cut another one, because I used to work for the Department of Transportation for Colorado up there, out of Patrol 19. But anyway, there's a lot of weird stuff. But to me, it wasn't weird after that, because once I seen what I seen, and you can't unsee it. It was like, okay, now I believe.
Yeah, but now you're on board, and there's no getting off.
I started telling people here and there, and they all looked at me like I was crazy, so I just quit telling the story. But like you say, you can't unsee what you see, and once it's taken out, you can't come and tell me I didn't see it. But that was before we had. It was before you had the cameras on your phone. I'm 66. So, it ain't like I'm coming here and being crazy, because everybody looks at you, oh, you're a nut. No, I just know what I say. And, I've met a lot of good fellas, because I got them stickers all over my truck. Everybody goes, where do you get that?
Yeah, that's all it takes.
Yeah, that's all it takes. And then you know what the sad part is? You have to sit there and try to convince them. I said, well, I'm not here to convince you. All I'm here to do is tell you the story. See, I know what I saw.
Love that.
You can't take that out of me. And I can't see, you can't see what I seen if you weren't there. I said, but for somebody being of a rational mind, you know what I mean, and worked in positions of authority, I'm not going to sit here and tell you, no, I didn't see it, because I did. And I said, and if you can give me a reason why they shut that land down, I would sure be interested, because you cut off a lot of good fishing in the state of Colorado,
Right. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Well, sir, I appreciate you coming up and sharing what you experienced in that area of Colorado. Thank you.
No problem. I just wanted to get that out to you. You have a wonderful evening, my friend.
You too, sir. Thank you.
Oh, no problem.
Crystal says, our reservation has some crazy altercations that made local papers. I've heard one, but didn't look. I'm going to see if Crystal is available to share what she is referring to. Hey, Crystal, this is Jeremiah. Thanks for coming up. You're saying you're having some things that were happening on your reservation regarding Bigfoot, or?
Yeah, well, we've had a lot of stuff that doesn't make the paper, but we've also had things that happen, and the instances that I want to talk about were from when I lived there. So this was probably, the mid 90s, I would say. I live in Nevada now. I used to live in the Pacific Northwest, near Bellingham, Washington, on a reservation called Lummi. And
oh boy, yeah, here we go. Yep.
Yeah, they were having a lot of, I think that sometimes tribal people tend to not tell outside communities like what happens when there is a rash of like a lot of people seeing them when they're in the area, active in the area, I should say. But my grandma and like older people used to plates of food out and stuff for them. So they would feed them. You know, if you went fishing, then you put some fish aside and she would take it back by the woods and she would leave it. And I assumed, like, okay, old people, maybe they're like feeding, you know, porcupine, dogs, skunks, you know, different stuff like that. And they wouldn't really talk about it unless they knew that they weren't going to be mocked or laughed at. And so my mom and my dad and my grandma were sitting in the living room this one time, and my dad started talking about when they had been down fishing by the river. And so I was kind of sitting there, and I'm younger, probably, you know, almost a teenager. And I was kind of sitting in the background, and I don't think they knew I was there. And I was sitting there just listening to them on the back porch, and they were in the living room. And they were saying, oh, yeah, remember we were down by the river and we were cooking and whatnot. And they were telling this story to my mom. My mom is originally from Nevada. So they were sitting in there talking, and they go, oh, yeah, tell her the story that made the Bellingham Herald. And she's kind of sitting there listening to them. Well, they were down there fishing, and when they put out fishing nets, they would like tie these poles out almost halfway across the river. And then they would have bells on the top of the poles. So when the fish would hit the nets, it would jingle. It would make like a jingling noise. And like 4 of these guys had their nets out on the river, and they're all just sitting there drinking beer and, like, you know, talking and whatnot. And it's about 3 a.m. around there. And they were kind of getting tired, and they were sitting around talking and stuff. And they could tell by the direction of the bell whose net it was. So like my dad's was on the closest to the fire, and Johnny's net was farther up the river. And they heard the bells jingle, and they said, oh, Johnny, it's your net. Like, go check your net, man. So there's a bunch of fish in your net. And so he goes out there, and he's taking a while. And they said, we stood up, and they wear like mining lights on their helmet, you know, around their foreheads, so they're able to get through the brush down to the river. And so they can see his light like going, and then it stops, and he's kind of standing there. And they were going, what is he doing? And they kind of got up, and they went, you know, closer to the edge of the river, and they were looking down toward where he was. So he's partway toward the river, and then they could see him move down and get in his boat. And then and then they start telling it from his perspective. And he said, Johnny said, he went and he got into a skiff, and he starts pulling himself along the net. And then he said all of a sudden his boat got hooked on something. And there are like, you know, branches and things like that your boat can get hooked on. And he was pulling himself along the net, and then he was kind of pulling on the net really hard, and he couldn't figure out like what it's hooked on. And he turned around and looked, and there was like this branch that was holding on to the edge of his dinghy. And so he moved it, and then he started to pull along the net again, and he noticed that the net was going up out of the water. So it was raised up, and he could just see it with the spotlight, like he was looking at the net. And he looked up, and that Bigfoot had the other end of the net and was pulling fish out. And he fell backwards, screaming in his boat. They could see him fall and start screaming. And so they all went running towards the path that he'd taken down to his boat. And he said, I fell back in the boat, but my headlight went down almost between my eyes, and I watched this thing. He goes, just take one step up out of this 10-foot embankment and just like pull itself up. He goes, it was enormous. It had to have been like 9-10 feet tall. He goes, because it went up easy, you know, and these ridges on the other side of the river are high. Like they're not, a man can't climb it. Like it would be a struggle for a person to do it. And so he starts screaming, they call the police, and then they bring the Bellingham Herald out the next day. And they're like, you know, show us where this happened and all this. And they went on the other side where that Bigfoot had climbed out, and there were these big giant footprints, and they made casts and everything, and it was on the front page of the Bellingham Herald. And they were talking about this rash of like sightings because other people had seen it. And this was where the river is. There's also like on the other side where it had climbed out. If you go maybe a quarter mile from there, there is this little town that they call Marietta, and it's super small. There's just like houses, and that's it. There's no store there anymore. There's not really anything. Well, a couple days after that, when the Bellingham Herald had come, and then when that sighting had happened, like people were talking about it the next day, and the person that was living, one of these people were living in Marietta, and he also was drying fish. Now they have like sheds where they dry meat and dry fish, and they tie them on ropes, and then there are nails in the ceiling, and they would hang this meat down from the ceiling. And this guy gets some fish, and he guts the fish, and he throws it out by the side of his house for the dogs and whatnot. And then he was tying these fish in the shed. And he said, I'd noticed like a couple of them missing, but I was thinking, well, maybe a dog's getting them, maybe something like that. Well, he said he didn't have enough line for it to, enough nails in the roof to hang the line from the roof to hang the meat up to dry. So he had brought it inside and then put safety pins along the wall, and then hung the thread, the rope or string or whatever, and was hanging the fish along his wall inside. And he had his chair and like his TV and stuff like that in his trailer, and he was sitting there watching TV. He said, and he heard the dogs, like first they were barking. He said, then all of a sudden everything went quiet. Like no barking, no sound from outside. And he thought that was kind of weird. And he got up and went in the kitchen, and he looked out the window, and he didn't see anything. And then he said, well, then I went back to my chair, and when I sat back in my chair, he goes, I'm facing the TV. The window is beside this meat. So I'm looking at the meat above the television, and then there's this window there. And he goes, I had the window open because the fish was smelly, and so he had the window propped open. And he said, I had just sat down and I looked up, and this face is in the window. He goes, but then it reached its arm in, and it grabbed one of the fish and scraped along the wall and left like marks on the wall. And I don't know if they were deep or whatnot. They had mentioned them in this article afterwards, but everybody was talking about that. And then after that, and they tend to be like they aren't all the time. It's not like all the time. It's like it almost seems seasonal, like as if they're going through somewhere or something. And well, anyway, he had mentioned that to this reporter. And aside from the scrapes on the wall and stuff like that, you're kind of going off of what someone said. She said, was there anybody else there? And he goes, no, it was just me. And she said, what did it look like? And he said, it looked like, he said it was brown, but its features looked more human than monkey. He said it had the nose that's like pushed up almost not between the eyes, but it's a lot higher than a human nose. So like the nose is higher, and then that big space between the mouth and the nose. And he said it had hair like all around except for around its eyes. And so the eyes, like it could see, almost like he was telling my uncle, it looked almost like something where a gorilla or something had goggles on, and you can see like gorilla skin is not like human skin. It's like really tough. It looked really tough. The skin looked really tough around the eyes and whatnot. Well, then a few years later, and I don't know if this is the same account also as, I don't know how many people have watched Sightings. They recorded this on sightings once as well, but they had only gotten one of these police officers' account, and he was the chief of police, the one that they talked to. They didn't talk to the deputy that had been at the other end of the road at the time that this had happened. This is a totally different account, like a couple years later.
This is like 70s, right?
The one with the police account, the chief of police, I believe, was Kenny Hilaire or something like that. That was in the 70s, the one that was on sightings. Okay. And then later on, they had come to speak to the police. And I don't even think that sightings was a thing. They were saying it was sightings, and I go, sightings isn't a thing anymore. I don't know if it was for their online. Like, I remember in the 90s, they had online where you could watch things online. Well, anyway, they had come and talked to somebody about this. Well, on our reservation, they had like a theft, like somebody had went into town, and so all these police, there are only like 2 roads that go onto this reservation from town. So they had been watching for this person's car when they were supposed to be coming, breaking the law or whatever. He somehow gets past them, and he's driving like erratically, and it's about midnight around there, and he kept shutting his headlights off, trying to get away from them. And he went down this main stretch of road in the center of this small little reservation. There are no houses. There was nothing. There was just trees, swamp, stuff like that. This is before they built the tribal building that they have now on this road. But it was just nothing out there. So he shuts his lights off, and he's driving down this road. Well, the police are after him, and they said, be careful of this guy. He's really big and really violent. So this police officer knows this guy, and he comes over the radio and he says, I saw so-and-so run across the road in front of me. And he stopped his car and turned the headlights into the bushes, turns his light on, and starts chasing after him. So he's like going through this thick blackberry bushes, brush, trees, everything, trying to, and he goes, I can hear him crashing through the bushes in front of me, like not even 30 feet in front of me. He goes, but I saw him. I saw his frame. I saw him run into the bushes. He goes, and so I'm getting back into the brush. He goes, and it starts getting really, really muddy, like into the swamp area. And he goes, I can hear him running. And he goes, stop right there, Kyle. I know that's you. And he's like going along, and he can see him like going behind trees and stuff, trying to get away. And he goes, and then all of a sudden it was quiet, and I couldn't see him. I don't see anything. And I'm standing now in like knee deep muddy water. He goes, and I'm kind of moving the flashlight around in these tree stumps and mud and brush and all this. He goes, then I saw him. He goes, and he was bent down in the water. And I said, all right, Kyle, I see you there. And he said, when I said that, this thing stood up out of the water, and I saw it. And it wasn't him. He goes, it stood up. And when it stood up, it raised its arms out, almost like a bird, like outstretched. It wasn't over its head. It wasn't like attacking. It just kind of raised its arms up. And he goes, I saw all this water coming off of this long hair under its arms. And I start screaming. And all those police officers are coming behind him. And so they come running up. And that thing turned and just walked away. He goes, and by this point, I'm screaming and falling backwards into the bushes, screaming. And those police officers get up there, and they got up there and they were like, what's going on? And he goes, that's not him. I don't know what that was. And they said, you don't know what it was? And he goes, well, I know what it was, but like, I don't think you'd believe me if I told you what I saw. And a lot of those police officers out there, they don't like talking about it, but they do. A lot of them have seen stuff. They've seen things, whatnot. Well, the last one that is most recent was probably in like 99 or 2000, I would say, because, I was like in high school. I was a senior. Well, anyway, one of my friends her dad was also a fisherman, and he had an overturned boat that he would keep in the backyard. And he had his net, and they would string their net out and dry their net and stuff like that. She had called me and said, I'm babysitting so-and-so. Why don't you come hang out and we'll watch movies? And I was like, okay. And, I was going to go over there, and my mom goes, you're not going anywhere. Like, they are saying that people are hearing stuff, people are seeing stuff, you're not going anywhere. And so I call her back and I said, I got to stay home or whatever. And so she is there with like 3 kids, and they're all asleep, and she's kind of sitting there watching movies. She said, and they had a motion light that was out aiming in the backyard to make sure nobody stole their buoys or stole their net and stuff like that. And she said the light came on the side where the car was, and then the light in the backyard came on. So I got up and was making sure that nobody was taking anything out of the backyard. She goes, so I went back there and I looked, and she goes, I actually saw a Bigfoot crystal. And I said, what? And she goes, yeah, it was eating the chum that was left in the bucket by our boat. And she said it was bent over, and I saw the back of it. And when the light, she goes, I don't know if it heard me or what. She goes, but I had leaned over the kitchen sink and I was looking at it. And she goes, it was almost like I couldn't stop looking at it. She goes, I was super afraid, but I was just watching it. And she said its elbows were like moving in this bucket. And then it turned and looked at her. She said, and then it stood up and it stepped through this blackberry brush that was separating these 2 tribal houses from each other. And she goes, it just walked through those bushes like nothing. And so the next day we were out there like looking around for like, what if there's hair? What if there's something like out there that we could find? And so we were out there like looking around, and I was looking like at the ground and stuff like that. And it's very damp, like very moist. The yards are very wet, especially in the fall and like springtime. But like we were looking around there, and it was indented, like the ground was indented, but it didn't look like a foot. Like there were no toes. I couldn't really see anything aside from that. And then the one time that I did hear it, like my mom was really freaked out. She's not from there or anything. And so when they would say that they're starting to see things, they're starting, like you better stay inside, don't go outside, don't, if you hear something weird, don't look out your window, that kind of thing. And we were inside, who I call my grandma. She's my adopted grandma, but we were inside her house, and we were getting ready to leave. I think we were eating dinner there, or something was going on at her house, and her son came in and he goes, hey, Karen, which is my mom's name. I wouldn't recommend you go out there. And she goes, why? And he goes, because it smells really bad out there. And we were like, oh no. And my mom was like, oh, great. And so we're kind of sitting there, and then we start hearing this sound, and it was like at first it almost sounded like a hooting, like a hoot, 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 hoot kind of sound. And then it turned into this more animal-y sound, like I don't want to say screaming or screeching. And then like I can't even replicate what it sounded like. It was very like you could tell it wasn't a human. It was a different octave of sound than if a man were outside like screaming or hollering. But it was calling, And where my adopted grandma lived, she lived above where they would harvest oysters. And we could hear it out there, and then it started whistling. So it made 3 different sounds. So there was like this period of like the hoot, hoot, hoot kind of sound. And it wasn't an owl sound either. It was loud, like really loud. But then that scream kind of sound, and then like a whistling. It almost sounded like chirping, but it was a high pitched like whistle sound. And then as we're sitting there, her son starts going, "Oh man, they're probably down there getting oysters again." And my mom goes, "Again?" And he was like, "Oh man, yeah, they were down there. Like, I don't know when this happened. I don't want to say when he saw this because I'm not sure." But he goes, "Oh yeah, I went out on the back porch, which aimed down this slope into the oyster field." And he goes, "I was standing there smoking a cigarette." He goes, "And I saw somebody walking along down in the water, and it was low tide." He goes, "So it was like, maybe to their ankles, maybe to their calves, something like that." He goes, "But I was sitting there watching them, and I was thinking, oh man, somebody's down there poaching oysters." And he was kind of sitting there smoking, watching them. And he said, "I could just see their silhouette. They were just moving along out in these oyster field where they dig oysters." He goes, "And then I was going, oh, pretty soon Tribal's going to show up and they're going to get in trouble." So he's kind of sitting there watching them. And he goes, "I expected them to pull out a rake or pull out something and start scraping, because that's, how those tribal people will harvest their clams and oysters and stuff." And he goes, "But this thing walked over to the slope where these big 300-pound burlap bags are." And he goes, these things were full and they were tied very, very similar to how you would keep oysters, or oysters, like, let's say like when people catch lobsters, they kind of keep them somewhere damp and they leave them down in the water, and then they get the oysters out or the lobsters out or whatever. Just trying to give you guys a idea of how they were kept. It was tied up. The top of the bag is tied. He goes, "I thought it was a man, but it lifted those 2 bags, 300-pound bags tied together, and slung it over its shoulder and start walking with these like almost 600 pounds of oysters." He goes, "Then I knew it wasn't a man." And I was,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Aware of, like, he goes, "They come back and forth through here to go down and harvest stuff, I think." And so we were sitting there, and my mom was like, "Well, I don't even want to go outside now." After my mom was going, I don't like this kind of stuff. Like, I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to see anything. I don't want you, like, after he got done with that, she was like, "I don't want to hear anymore." And a lot of Native people seem like they're like that, where they'll go, "I don't want to hear it. Like, don't tell me. I don't need to hear that. I have to live here." And so,
Oh wow.
very, yeah, a lot of Native people, I think, are kind of almost like respectful of that. Like, they don't want to really talk about the things that they see. And then outside of the culture, nobody believes you anyway. And so they'll just go, "Nobody's going to believe you anyway. Why tell anybody about that kind of stuff? Because none of that matters. None of it matters to anybody outside of here, because they don't have to live here. We do." And so it's more like in Native cultures, I think a lot of the time they don't want to say anything because it's looked at as, "I can't believe you believe something like that." And I go, "Well, if you saw it, if you were there, then you would understand, like, why they're quiet and why they don't say much about the things that they see, or, experiences that they've had or things that they've heard or any of that. Like my dad and my uncles and stuff didn't talk about most of the things that they would see, whether they were paranormal or whether they were Bigfoot or whether they were whatever it was. They kind of wouldn't want to talk about it. And so like getting stories out of a lot of Native communities, I think is really hard because they kind of use it as entertainment. Like, oh, that's, somebody just making something up. That's somebody just telling a story. It's not really real. It's something that people do to pass the time. And so, when it's situations like that culturally, and the fact that, my grandma used to say, you feed those things out of what you catch so they'll leave you alone. You respect them. And so they would put out food and stuff like that. And she goes, that's the reason you're doing it. It's not because you're trying to call them around. It's because you want to respect them as a people. Let's say if they're a certain type of people, then you do that for them and they will respect you and you respect them and you stay out of their way and you don't interfere and you don't you do your best to just deal with what's going on and not so much trying to explain it to people who don't want to hear it. A lot of people will say they're an animal, they're this, they're that. My grandma said they're from somewhere else. They're not here all the time. They're not here all the time. So they're not a monkey and they're not because there were certain places on our reservation that also had other abnormal areas. And my grandma would say, there's a doorway there. And so there are a lot of places on different reservations and people will study them and they'll come in and try to poke around and figure it out. And the Native people go, it's a door, leave it alone. It doesn't need to be having stuff coming in and out of those places. And the more you poke it, the more it will do it. And so don't mess with it. Just ignore it. A lot of the time, I think that Native people understand the thing that's going on, but they don't like to say it. And so, well, where are the bodies and where is this and where is that? And my grandma would go, they're not from, they're from somewhere. They're from somewhere else. It's why you can't find them all the time. That's why you can't track them down. That's why you can't hunt them. That's why you can't shoot them, certain stuff like that. But that's my grandma's idea of what they are and why your paths cross with them every now and again, but they're made of something humans are not made of, if that makes sense. I don't know if it even does to non-Native people or not, but yeah.
I think I can try to grasp it. I don't know if I can fully grasp it, but I'm just so glad that you were in here. I've been wanting to talk to someone who had a connection with the Lummi Reservation for years, to be honest. I mean, there's so many wild stories that come out of there, and you referenced a few yourself, but it's also in close proximity to the San Juan Islands. Did you ever hear about that area living when you lived in that area, like the possibility of Sasquatch living on some of the islands?
Well, some of the fishermen had stories about that. Like most of the people fish, like the men and stuff like that, and they would say, oh yeah, don't go through that channel at this certain time or whatever if you don't want to be creeped out or freaked out or see something in the water swimming or because a lot of them would say, oh yeah, we saw a Bigfoot swimming across right there. And a lot of the time the people who would tell you these things, they'd say, let's say my friend drank quite a bit, and they would say, oh man, we saw a Bigfoot swimming across right there. And everybody would go, oh, he's drunk, like quite a bit. So like, how serious are you going to take this? Well, then you hear 2 or 3 other ones saying the same kind of thing, or walking along the embankment to go up. Portage was another one that they would see Bigfoot quite a bit, and that's a tiny, tiny island just right on the other side, and it dries all the way out, and you can drive over there. And people camp there, crazy people do, but like you could set up a tent over there and drive across and camp there if you wanted to. But they would say, yeah, there are Bigfoot footprints all over there if you go over there at the right time of year, and like in the sand going across. You can drive a pickup truck across there and get to the island, and then when the tide comes in, they would go, yeah, there are big old footprints out there. Not boot prints, like toes, feet, like feet going over there. And so yeah, there are other stories of people, and a lot of fishermen have odd stories, of hearing things coming from certain islands. And you don't know whether they're Bigfoot related or not, based off of different quote unquote doorways, if you'd like to call them that, being in certain places. They'd hear a lot of weird things that people can't explain, and they don't understand what they're hearing exactly, from people calling them to like noises to sounds to, someone calling their name from a certain island where nobody lives, stuff like that. And so it's just odd all the way around in a lot of those places. And I think that if people were to be able to see energy, like where these doorways or portals, if you want to call them that, or whatever they are, where things go in and out of, and be able to understand really what's happening in a lot of these reservations, because a lot of stuff happened in these areas and stuff. The fact that Native people don't bother them, like if they see something weird, they don't go poke around. They're looking. Right. They're not going to get out. Let's go check it out. They're not about that. They just kind of go, oh yeah, like if you don't want any more weird, then don't go poke around weird. Like if you don't understand it, don't mess with it, because you don't know what that is in the first place.
That makes perfect sense. Wow.
Yeah,
There's so much information in this conversation. Thank you for coming up, Crystal. Would you be able to, do you mind sending me an email in case I have questions that come up later? I mean, just to have you as like a contact.
sure. I noticed on your chat there, someone said, don't they throw rocks? My ex-boyfriend had a situation where he didn't believe in Bigfoot or anything. And he was working up on Mount Baker, and they were clearing land on Mount Baker with like, big equipment and stuff like that. And he said there was a bulldozer that was sitting up there. And he goes, when we got up there, it's like 5 a.m. We had to get up there really early. And he goes, we go up there. He goes, and the guy I was with goes, stay really close to me, man. I don't like it up here. And he goes, why not? And he goes, I don't know. I'm seeing a lot of Bigfoot up here when I'm by myself. And he goes, oh no. And he's kind of like, ooh, he doesn't believe him. He's like, 20 years old, doesn't believe him, never saw anything like that. And he goes, but we get up there, and he goes, we pull in, and I see this tall figure walk around the edge of the bulldozer. And then I see the bucket go down on the bulldozer. And he goes, we're sitting in the truck, and neither one of us is saying anything. And when the bucket went down, he goes, what's that? And the guy he's with doesn't answer him. They're just sitting there. And then he says he sees it walk away. Like he can finally see it when it moves away from the bucket, and it had gone into the trees. And he goes, he goes, when I imagine a Bigfoot, I'm thinking like black or dark brown. He goes, that thing was orange. It was like light light colored. He goes, but it walked into the bushes and it was just gone. He goes, but when we finally got out, we radioed our boss and we were like, when are you guys getting here? And we didn't want to tell them what we'd seen. Well, we were there. He goes, but we walked around the front of the bulldozer and this giant boulder was set in the middle of the trough of that. That's what had weighed it down, was this giant boulder that it set in the middle of the bucket. And he goes, it took us hours to get that, to wait for the guy. We tried to pry it off with a stick. We tried all this stuff. He goes, that thing weighed, I don't know how much it could have weighed. He goes, but we had to wait for that operator to get there to dump it off of the shovel part of the bulldozer part, the part that has the bucket on it. He goes, but we had been trying for like an hour and a half, 2 hours to get that boulder out before this guy got there, because we didn't want to have to explain how the boulder got there. And we didn't want to have to explain to these people like why we put it there, because everything wasn't left the way that we had left it. And so, a lot of little things like I'm not somebody who had personally seen it. And so, but I do know a lot of people that don't have any reason to lie about something like that. And then all the workers, when they did get there, were going, what was going on here with this? And they're kind of looking at it like, what did you guys do? Because you don't know how to operate this, and how did this get in here? And so having to tell it to half native, half non-native people, and then have all the non-natives like laugh and make fun of you and whatever,
Right.
So it's kind of, but yeah, I see your email up here and whatnot. So
Awesome, Crystal. Yeah. Thank you for coming up and for sharing some just incredible accounts. I really appreciate it.
yeah, no problem. You have a great night.
All right. I'll be looking out for your email. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Here at Bigfoot Society, our goal is to provide a platform for those that have encountered Bigfoot to share their encounter in a safe and respected environment. But we need to hear your story. If you've experienced something that you just can't explain, please send me an email at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Then we can start the conversation. I know a lot of you have not shared your encounter at all. It's been 20 years, and it's time that you get this off your chest, and then you can get some well-deserved rest, because I know you haven't been sleeping. I understand what you're going through, and I appreciate every one of you listening.
Bigfoot Society podcast, hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Slaya. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's the list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.